All right, guys, I think we'll start. So thank you all very much indeed for joining me. For those of you who don't know me, I'm John Round Turner. I'm the Sales and Marketing Director for Abercrombie & Kent in East Africa. So today we're going to focus on our webinar of learning about Laikipia, how it fits into an itinerary, and trying to demystify a little bit about the various different conservancies that we have in Laikipia, what there is to do there, but also some of our favorite properties. If anybody has any questions at all, please type them into the question box and I will get to all the questions at the end. So this is the region that we're talking about. Laikipia, it's in it's north of Nairobi. It sits in the foothills of Mount Kenya. So what we can do for people who want to see a variety of different options within Kenya, starting in Nairobi, we can do the Chulu Hills or Amboseli or even Tsavo West as your first point of call for a couple of nights. Get the clients up to Laikipia, 2 or 3 nights, and then straight down to Masai Mara. So as I said, Laikipia sits sort of underneath Mount Kenya, which makes for great views of the mountain, but also because it sort of sits just north of the equator, it's got a semi-arid climate, so it's warm all year round. It's got a fantastic density of wildlife, which I think is very, very important when you've got clients on safari. So this is Laikipia up close, and I think this is where a lot of people do get a bit confused with the various different conservancies. So all these are conservancies that are conservation focused. Traditionally, this region was and still is in many places a cattle ranching area. So, and it has been for about 150 years since the British settlers came over. And because of the great quality of the grazing, they were able to farm cattle here very, very successfully. But what we're seeing now is a number of the cattle ranches. The owners are converting it either entirely to conservation purposes, or they are mixing their cattle ranching and conservation together. The areas here which has no conservancy that's listed, this is all pretty much still cattle ranching territory. As I said, the cattle ranching here works very, very well because the quality of the grazing was very, very good. Because of the for cattle is also very good for wildlife. So when you get the plains game in, you get the predators that follow soon after behind them. All right, so we're going to go through a number of these conservancies, the properties that are in them. But first, I just wanted to highlight, if you're doing a flying safari, they can fly down to this area of Kenya, back to Nairobi, and then up to Laikipia. It's anywhere between 50 minutes and an hour and 15 minutes, depending on where the clients are staying and which conservancy within the region. And then from Laikipia, they can fly directly to Masai Mara. There's no need for them to go back through Nairobi. And that's probably an hour and a half maximum. Anywhere between an hour and 15 and an hour and a half flight. So in terms of access, Laikipia is actually very, very easy. If you do have clients who want it to drive, then the southern parts of the Laikipia area are accessible in about 4.5 hours from Nairobi, and then they can, if they're continuing driving from Laikipia down to the Masai Mara, we can overnight them in Lake Nakuru or Lake Naivasha, just to break the journey up. So what makes Laikipia special? Why would we want to include it in a client's itinerary? Well, a number of factors, and first and foremost is the wildlife. Because you've got a very different landscape up here, it's quite dry, semi-arid, you've got animals that have adapted themselves to live in that environment, and they generally don't live further south, so not in Masai Mara and not in the northern parts of Tanzania. So for example, we have the Gerenuk. So this is one antelope that's evolved to be able to browse on those lower reaches of the thorn tree. So it's too high for the ordinary plains game that graze on the grass, and it's too low for the giraffes. So they found themselves this little niche in which to survive. Something else that's very unique to this part of the world is the Grevy's zebra. So the Grevy's zebra are actually endangered. There's only 2,500 left in the world. There's actually more of these animals in zoos than there are out in the wild. They may look a little bit similar to the Burchell's or the plains zebra, the common zebra, but they're very, very different. They've got a very different stripe pattern in terms that it's very, very narrow. They have big white bellies. They have big ears, big round ears, and the animals actually live in a different way. Whereas the Burchell's or the common zebra tend to group together in large herds. These animals, the males are quite territorial. The women will live in herds, and they will wander between the various different territories of the males. Laikipia has the highest concentration of animals, of Grevy's zebras found anywhere in Kenya. So, and they're indigenous to Kenya, southern Sudan and Ethiopia. Something else that's also indigenous to this part of the world is the reticulated giraffe. So the reticulated giraffe are much, much darker in pattern, much more sort of box-like in terms of their pattern than the Maasai giraffe. The Maasai giraffe are much paler and much more yellow. So the reticulated giraffe, to my mind, are much more photographic than the Maasai giraffe. Again, something that's also unique to northern parts of Kenya is the oryx. Oryx are also live in Middle Eastern parts of the world, but they're adapted to live in the Laikipia region. So again, look, it's something else, something unique, something different, something that you're not going to be able to see. So the clients won't be able to see oryx anywhere else in East Africa except for the Laikipia region and further north. And then we have the kudu. Again, an animal that's adapted itself to be able to live in the semi-arid areas of Laikipia and further north. You won't see a kudu in Masai Mara or Serengeti. So again, something else, something different, something unique that makes Laikipia a special place for clients to come and visit. The African wild dog. These numbers used to be extensive throughout the whole of Africa, East and Central Africa. But because of human encroaching on their habitats, they have almost been wiped out. But we're great to see that the numbers are increasing, which is fantastic. Because these private conservancies, these private ranches have wealthy owners, they are able to put in place a variety of measures to prevent animals being poached and to help conservation. So this has seen a great rise in the African wild dog populations. But aside from all the fantastic wildlife that we have in Laikipia that's not found anywhere else, we have still, of course, have the traditional wildlife that people would come to expect East Africa to be famous for. So the Burchell's zebra, which you can see the differences in the stripes as well as their bellies. The stripes go all the way around the bellies. But not only that, we've also got the predators. So when you've got great grazing, you've got great plains game, that's when you get lots of great predators. So of course the cheetah, and then of course we have plenty of lions as well. Now traditionally the lions, leopards and elephants were pushed out of Laikipia because it's cattle ranching territory. They didn't want anything competing with the cattle, but they also didn't want anything to eat the cattle. So they were killing a lot of these predators and elephants on site. But that has all changed now, and it's now become one of the safest places to have elephants, lions, cheetahs, leopards in the country. What makes Laikipia even more special, not only the high density of wildlife that we've got, the different wildlife, but this is the best possible place to see rhinos anywhere in East Africa. As I said, these owners of ranches are are incredibly wealthy people, so they're able to afford the necessary measures to be put in place to prevent rhinos from being poached. By that I mean we've got armed rangers, we've got aircraft with heat-seeking infrared cameras so that they can pinpoint exactly where the poachers are. So that's the wildlife in a nutshell. But what we've also got is an amazing array of activities. I think it's very important to get people out of the vehicle, to get them to experience the landscape in a different way. So here's just a variety of different activities. The vast majority can't be done outside of Laikipia. Now, the reason they can be done in this area is because we're talking about private land. You've got the autonomy to be able to do these activities. You're not confined by the same laws that you're confined by in national parks and national reserves. So you have quad biking, buggy riding, and we do these in certain areas where wildlife is not prevalent, so it's generally cattle ranching areas. Horse riding. Laikipia is a fantastic place for horses. Again, because these private landowners, they've always used horses to look at the land, check their fence line. So the descendants of the original landowners, so the grandchildren, the great-grandchildren, they have this natural affinity with horses. All these horses are born and raised in Laikipia. They go out into the bush on a daily basis, so they're not spooked by ordinary animals. And for me, being on horseback means you could access to parts of the conservancies that the vehicles would find very difficult to get to. You're also part of the landscape. The other wild animals don't see you as being a threat. They don't see you as a human on a horse. You're just another animal. So it means you can get quite close to some animals in very good, in total safety. You can just have an opportunity to get some fantastic photographs. Barana, which I'll talk about later, is probably one of the best places for horses. All the people who offer the horse riding, they have the proper guides who know exactly what they're doing, how to handle a horse. Another opportunity that's incredibly unique is the biplane. So this is a replica of the plane that Dennis Finch Hatton used to fly. So Dennis Finch Hatton was the lover of Karen Blixen in the 1920s and early 1930s. So this is a replica of his plane. It's actually a two-seater, so the client sits at the front and the pilot sits at the back, and they can offer this for 30 minutes, 40 minutes, something like that. Great to fly around Laikipia to see the region from the air, but also in quite an iconic, quite a vintage vehicle. If you've got clients who are looking for something a little bit different, something maybe they're a bit more adventurous, and they're willing to travel further afield, Laikipia is a great launch pad for helicopter safaris. A town called Nanyuki, which is part of Laikipia, a lot of the helicopters are actually located there. So they can fly into the conservancy, pick clients up, and then you've got a whole northern part of Kenya, which is vast majority of it is almost inaccessible by vehicles, and it's absolutely glorious landscape. So it's great to pack a beautiful lunch, a couple of bottles of wine, and head off into the Northern Frontier District. So you've got Matthews Range. You've got some fantastic opportunities for some amazing photographs in and around Lake Turkana. So it's a great opportunity. So you've got clients who want something a little bit more adventurous, then I would highly recommend they look at helicopter flights. Camel riding, slightly more sedate than the horse riding, probably a little bit less comfortable. A lot of people aren't aware, but camels are actually indigenous to this part of Kenya. They still live wild in herds throughout the northern parts of Kenya. So the two gentlemen leading the camels in the red shukas are Samburu warriors, and the Samburu have used camels much like the Maasai have cattle. The Samburu have camels. So again, something different, and you don't have to go out on a camel all day every day. A couple of hours is more than enough, but again, it's getting people out of the vehicle, getting them to experience some new activities, something different. And then my favorite, the traditional walking safari. I mean, this is how this part of Africa was discovered, hundreds of years ago. And for me, there's nothing better than going out on a walk through the bush. You get to see and experience the small things, whether it's animal dung, footprints, um, snakeskin that's been shed, carcasses or bones or skulls of animals that have, you know, met their maker. It's just a great way of being able to experience this part of Africa. So again, do bear this in mind. If you've got clients who are a little bit adventurous, they want to experience something a little bit different, then walking is a great way of doing that. All the walking guides are very, very experienced. They all know the area incredibly well. They all carry firearms, and they can recognize the signs of there's a problem ahead, and that's the fundamental. When you know that there's something ahead, you change plans, you sort something out, you make a plan. That's the sign of a good guide. If you've got clients who are quite keen on cycling, then cycling is an activity that can be done. They generally cycle on the grassy plains. They don't tend to go through the bushes. They want to be able to make sure that clients can see that the wildlife is around them. They will have guides as well. Same as when you're walking, same as when you're on horses. You'll always have a guide with you when you're stepping out into the bush. And then something quite sedate. This is not whitewater rafting. This is just gentle rafting on the river. So generally done at a place called Boisaba, because the river is quite shallow, so there's no crocodiles, no hippos. But again, it's just something different, something unique, something, get them out of the vehicle, get them to experience what it's like. There's, 20 minutes, half an hour of this. It's absolutely amazing. And the little things, the bird calls, the butterflies, little things like that. Little touches that make a very unique safari. And then Laikipia is absolutely fantastic place for children. I've been very fortunate. I am the father of 3 very curious young girls, and they love going up to Laikipia. A lot of, as I said earlier, a lot of the original ranch owners, the grandchildren, are now middle-aged or slightly younger. They've all had children. They've all brought their children up in this area. So the staff are there. A lot of properties have the child coordinators within the property, so they become the guide for the children. And of course, with A&K, we have our own child coordinators. So if you've got clients traveling with children and they want their children to be looked after, but more than that, it's about giving the kids a very unique, very different education. I always tell my children, 30 minutes in the bush is better than 3 hours in the classroom. So we've got fantastic wildlife that's different to anywhere else in East Africa. We've got an array of amazing activities to get people out of the vehicle, get them to experience our part of the world in a very different, very unique manner. So that's 2 fantastic reasons to look at Laikipia as part of an itinerary for clients coming to East and Southern Africa. So what I want to do now is I want to hit a few high points and some of our favorite preferred properties within the various different conservancies. This is not an extensive list. Please, by all means, there's a lot of other fantastic properties that we use there, but I just wanted to highlight a few key ones so that you are aware of the level of accommodation that we've got in this region. Because it's privately owned, because they're incredibly wealthy people, we're generally looking at smaller, boutique, your higher end properties. Towards the end of this presentation, there's a couple of very good 4-star options, which I think is also very important, so that people are aware that it's not just about the 5-star. We've got some great, really good quality 4-star products that still offer the same sort of level of exclusivity. And you've got to remember, most of these conservancies, they have 2 or 3 properties, maybe 4 properties in 100,000 acres. So you have that level of exclusivity that you generally won't get in other parts of East Africa. So Laikipia, we're looking at Lewa Downs, which is technically not in Laikipia, but let's not split hairs, and Borana. So they've actually formed together to create quite a large conservancy. And it's actually one of the largest conservancies that hold rhinos. In Lewa, there's a number of property options, but Sirikoi is one of our favorites. It has 3 different types of accommodation. There's Sirikoi House, which is a 3-bedroomed house beautifully appointed, very, very comfortable. It's not flashy, it's just extreme elegance in the bush. So Siracoy is 7,500 acres, sitting in the middle of Lewa, and it's fed by a freshwater spring which comes off Mount Kenya. As you can see, the grass outside is absolutely glorious. I'm always very jealous of their lawn. So then Siracoy have a villa. It's a 2-bedroom villa, and it's relatively close to the 3-bedroom house. So you can take these on exclusive use for multi-generational families, friends traveling together. They also have their own entrance and exit, their own public areas. So they're a very, very good option for people who are traveling in slightly larger than your 2 or 3 pack, 4 pack FIT. Amazing views overlooking Lewa Downs, Lewa Wildlife Conservancy plains there. But then they have 4 luxury tents, and they are, again, beautifully done. You can see there's a common theme running between all 3 of their properties. It's a great product. We love selling it. We're one of their biggest suppliers. So that's your 5-star deluxe product in Lewa. Then there's Lewa Wilderness, which would be like a great standard 5-star. It's a lodge rather than a tented camp. And this was actually one of the original houses. It was open to the public as a safari lodge in 1972. The great-grandchild of the original owner of Lewa is the owner of this property. Him and his wife, his name's Will Craig. He is actually the pilot of the biplane that I showed you earlier. Him and his wife Emma are the hosts at Lewa Wilderness, and that's one thing I think is fantastic. The quality of hosting is amazing. So you've got this very homely, very relaxed, very elegant feel about it, but then the hosting is brilliant. So they're the ones that can give you the stories of what it was like growing up in Lewa, which I think is fantastic, and it just adds another dimension to the client's safari. I think now is a good juncture for me to just remind people that A&K's private camping in Lewa is a fantastic option, again, for your larger groups, multi-generationals, friends traveling together. So for those of you who aren't aware, A&K has a series of these amazing tents that we go into certain areas, and we're one of the very few people that are allowed to do this in Lewa. We can go in, we just cut the grass, and we set these tents up exclusively for the clients. They're all en suite, and the food is absolutely amazing. So just a reminder about that as well. And then as a sort of 4.5-star product, we've got Lewa Safari Camp. Again, it's the original, the public areas was a house that was originally owned by one of the owners of Lewa Downs, Lewa Wildlife Conservancy. And they've got them beautiful public areas, and what they've then done is they've created a series of 12 rather large tents around that area with some nice views over the plains. So it's a great 4.5, 5-star tented product. And then to the next door conservancy. So Borana and Lewa have joined forces, as I said, making a very large rhino sanctuary. As this is one of the best places for to see rhinos. Lewa was one of the first people to convert cattle ranching into a conservation project, and they did that in 1994. And they've really become pioneers of cattle and wildlife living side by side. Because of their success, the carrying capacity of some of the wildlife, including the rhinos, was getting very close to being exceeded. So they did a deal with Borana. They've removed the fences that were between the 2 ranches, the 2 conservancies. So now you've got this access to this amazing, huge, super conservancy. So Borana Lodge, again, one of the owners built a house on the most beautiful part of Borana, and they've converted it now into a 12-unit lodge. What I love about the Borana and Lewa access is Lewa has quite a lot of rolling plains, rolling hills, and Borana is a lot more hilly, a lot more rocky. So you've got the great contrast between the 2. And if you're staying in any of those properties, you have access to both conservancies included in the conservancy fee, which I think is fantastic. What they also have at Barana is Laragai House. Laragai House is great for people who want exclusive use house, again, multi-generationals, large groups of families. It has 4 bedrooms and seats up to 10 people. Again, this house was originally built by the grandparents that they're now selling as a commercial venture. So that's a little bit about Barana and Lewa Wildlife. So I want to step it up a notch and go to Segera. So Segera is one of the newer conservancies. It used to be purely 100% cattle ranching, and then it was bought out by a gentleman called Jochen Zeitz. Now, Jochen Zeitz is the owner of Puma Sportswear, and he has built a beautiful retreat in about 50,000 acres of some pristine conservancy. So I say it's a retreat, and I emphasize that because it's really not just about the wildlife. It's not a safari per se. It's much more about the environment that they're in. They're very, very conscious of the local community. They're very conscious about the conservation projects that they have in place. They've done a beautiful job. Well, they've got 6 of these exquisite villas. They're all large. They're all built on platforms, and they all have amazing views across the plains. They've also got a beautiful wine tower, which is actually wine from Jochen Zeitz's personal cellar that he has shipped over from Europe, and you can actually sit in the middle of his wine tower, which is actually, it's like a windmill without the arms, and have an amazing meal down there. They also have one of the most beautiful spas in this region. So it's not just about the wildlife, although the wildlife is very good, but it's that sort of relaxation, unwind, get away from it all. This is Segera House. This is where Jochen Zeitz stays. You can actually see his Rolls Royce on the left there. But this is also available for people to stay in. It's a 2-bedroomed house. What they've also done within the conservancy is they've got a lot of African artists from all over Africa who've come and created what they call living sculptures. So they just found bits and pieces lying around the conservancy, and they created these sculptures. And their living aspect is because if an animal comes and knocks it over, then they're not going to replace it. It's going to be part and parcel of the life. You can do it as a standalone at Segera, or you can focus on another conservancy which has a lot more wildlife, rhinos, and then come back to Segera at the end of a trip, just a couple of days to relax and unwind. It's a fantastic, fantastic property. Right, moving further north into the northern part of Loisaba, of Laikipia, is Loisaba Wilderness. So Loisaba Wilderness was actually owned by an Italian count who was keen on hunting, but also built a cattle ranch and then became a conservationist. So sort of a poacher turned gamekeeper, if you like. When he died in the mid-1990s, his daughter has created a trust to maintain the integrity of this part of the world. Elawana, which is a fantastic property chain throughout Kenya and Tanzania, they're currently building this tented camp in Loisaba. It'll have 10 or 12 tents. It's going to be open in March. I was told, I have a feeling it'll be June this year. But again, a brand new property. It's going to be great. You can see the sizes of the tents there. For those of you who are interested, Loisaba actually means 7 stars in Kiswahili. And there's no better way to see the stars than on one of the Loisaba star beds. So within the conservancy, they have 3 star beds. So basically, it's a raised platform, ensuite bathroom with a bedroom. But what you do is you roll the bed out and you sleep under the stars. Fantastic for honeymooners. You don't need to do more than one night. If you want clients to do this, you put them in another conservancy for a couple of nights, or they stay at the Elawana Loisaba tented camp for 2 nights, and then they do this as their last night. An amazing, amazing experience. I've been very fortunate to be able to see and stay here on a couple of occasions. So if anybody has questions, now is a very, very good time to type them in. I'm coming towards the end of the presentation. So the last 2 conservancies that I want to mention, Old Pejeta For me, Olpegita is one of the stars, the unsung heroes of Laikipia. Their conservancy is fantastic. They've joined forces with the Mutara Conservancy just to the northwest to make about 110,000 acres. They have a huge number of rhinos in the conservancy, which I think is amazing. The most important rhino probably in the world is a gentleman called Sudan. So Sudan is thought to be the last remaining male northern white rhino, slightly different to the southern white rhino. So he was actually raised in captivity in a zoo in the Czech Republic, and there were 4 rhinos, so 2 males and 2 females were flown out to Olpegita Conservancy in 2009. The other male sadly died, and so the rest of the species rests on Sudan's shoulders. Unfortunately, he's not helping the conservancy all that much at the moment, but it is thought that he will be eventually able to raise some offspring. He is getting on a bit. He is in his 30s now, so he doesn't have too much more time left. The other thing I think is fantastic with Olpegita is they've got a chimpanzee sanctuary. So these are chimpanzees who were living in captivity. Many of them were born in captivity. Many of them were stolen from their parents. Their parents were murdered and they were taken, and they were used in zoos for party tricks around the world. So chimpanzees are not indigenous to Kenya, but they've created this chimpanzee sanctuary for these chimpanzees to be able to live some of their last days as a chimpanzee should do. It's part of the conservancy. You can't touch the animals, but you can certainly see them, and you can certainly see what they're doing. And it's just, again, something that's different, something you can't really see easily in other parts of Kenya. And Tanzania, you can only see them in 2 different places, and they're quite difficult places to get to. In terms of accommodation, I've got 2 here. Kicheche Laikipia is a great 4.5-star product. It's all tented, great location in the middle of Olpegita, very comfortable. Food is fantastic. So for that 4.5-star product, it works very, very well. We do like sending clients there, and they always have a very good feedback. And then if you have clients on a 4-star budget and wanting to look for something different, or if you've got clients with a family, I know how expensive it is to travel around with youngsters, then Sweetwaters is a great 4-star tented option in Olpegita. It does have 51 tents, but you still have access to a great game sanctuary. You've got access to the opportunity to see rhinos in their natural habitat. You've got the chimpanzee sanctuary there as well. And there's a number of other very, very good activities that can be done in Olpegita. And then the last conservancy I want to talk to you about is a place called Solio. Now, Solio has the highest concentration of rhinos found anywhere in East Africa. They've got 158 rhinos in 20,000 acres. There's only the one property in Solio, and it's called Solio Lodge. It's quite high-end, but it's quite funky. It's sort of modern African, I think they describe it as. It's just a great property. But Solio is all about the rhinos. It's probably the easiest place certainly in East Africa, to see rhinos in their natural habitats. Generally, by the second day, people don't even stop when they see a rhino because there's just so many of them. Well, thank you for joining me on this webinar. We've got a series of webinars that we're doing until the end of the year. The next one is the wildebeest migration and where to stay and when, and that's on the 16th of March. We have another one which is entirely focused on Kenya, but as a much wider product in Kenya. It's on the 20th of April, and the Ngorongoro Conservation Area and its activities on the 18th of May. We will be sending emails out with links to all these webinars. If anybody has any questions, please type them into the questions box now, and I'll very, very happily answer those. At the moment, I don't have any questions, but if you have questions, please feel free to type them in now. Any questions? If nobody has any questions, guys, thank you very much indeed. It's been an absolute pleasure. If you do have questions, my email address is on the screen. Please shoot me an email. I'll happily answer. This webinar has been recorded, and I will happily send you a link to the recording so that you have access to it at a later date, or if there's anybody else in your offices. That's all from me. Thank you all very much indeed. Have a very, very good rest of your day. I know you guys are nearly done, but so thank you all very much indeed.